from the top. Okay. Drop that. Yeah. Feel the funk, y'all. Yeah. Feel the funk, y'all. Yeah. You lay back in the cut. What's up? What's up?
From Alpha to Omega, VHS to Beta, PlayStation to Sega, my skill is still greater. The sickest thing since BD, wicked like Ouija. Live my life crooked like the left finger on ET. Please believe.
Welcome to Sins and Suffers podcast. I am your host, Mario Stanley. All right, so today on the show we have Cody Bradford. Cody and I were recently connected by Irene, Lady Lockoff. Guys, please make sure you check out her Instagram. If you don't know, you're missing out. But jumping back to Cody, he is currently a rock guide, and he is aspiring to become an IFMGA. If you don't know what that is, that's just like as high as you can get, your full baller status in the world of guiding. This is not Cody and I's first conversation, and the previous conversations were really amazing because it's hard to find people who are just so woke. Stealing this concept from Code Switch, amazing podcast. If you guys don't listen to it already, check it out. Now that your earbuds are salivating for the conversation, I have one thing I need to ask you guys before we hit play here. I need your help to grow this show. So on whatever platform you're listening to this on, make sure you like, follow, and leave a comment. I know it doesn't seem like a big thing, but it definitely helps this episode and this show grow. Enjoy. Cody, welcome to Sins and Suffers, buddy. How are you?
Mario, thanks for having me. I'm well, a little tired. Just got back from a big objective I've been working on thinking about for quite a while, and so it's a good tired. But
Nice.
but I'm here and I'm psyched.
Nice. What did you go do?
I just got back from the Torment Forbidden Traverse, Ridgeline Traverse in the North Cascades of Washington.
Oh, nice. Nice. Well, I'm excited to hear about this. So as always, we need to let everybody know who you are and where you're from and, what do you do? And so, can you just tell everybody that and your relation to the outdoors?
Yeah, for sure. My name's Cody Bradford. I'm an AMJ certified rock guide, and I guide full time. This year, I'm taking a time off because of COVID-19 and just feeling like that I just didn't feel super responsible working. So as of right now, I'm just Cody Bradford on Instagram, and I started climbing and also kayaking and backpacking and whatnot in 2007, 2008. And before that, I had never really done any outdoor pursuit other than going on a run or a bike ride on my little Walmart bike, and didn't really know the difference between a knot and a. So outdoors was really new to me. And I guess to be fair, even though it's been over a decade now, I guess as a whole, I'm fairly new to the outdoors in relative terms, but I care about it a lot. And it's something I've just dove into head first. Before this, I was a musician and was thinking that was going to be full time. And so as being in the outdoors now means my life. And so I've made it my life and made it my profession and made it my career. And that's been kind of quite the change now that I really think about how short of time frame that's been.
Yeah, dude, that's massive. I mean, 2008 to being a full AMGA guide and guiding people climbing and, and for anybody who doesn't know you have a fairly large following on Instagram. Your social media does really well. You are known for definitely being in my toolkit of like Instagram save folders of just like quick tips on all the things that we know how to do, or anybody who's ever taken like an AMGA course or a test, like every one of those things that you see and you always wish, you're like, man, I wish there was this, like a little video from it. It guaranteed you have made it, I think.
I appreciate hearing that. And thank you. I just never expected what came about it. Also, there are times when I just feel guilty because I feel like the relative time I put into it. I mean, I do it now because I want people to have free information. I know that it's not cheap to hire a guide. I want to figure out how it's a whole different story, how the system in the US operates and how it kind of keeps us from having that kind of freedom. But
Yeah.
This is just my way to do that. And that's kind of what it's become. But it's also really, I feel, especially with channels like yours that are quite professionally done, and someone like you who's also been in this game for quite a while, a great coach, a great mentor, and has a channel that actually has professional editing on it, for example, and you're quite good at speaking as well. I just find it amazingly surprising and I'm humbled by it that I have the following I have. But at the same time, I also hope folks know that there's other people on Instagram too.
Yeah.
and,
Yeah. Yeah.
and maybe it's because I'm trying to take some responsibility off of myself. I don't know. Sometimes I do feel like that sense of responsibility, and given the time of day I give my Instagram account, it's interesting. But yeah, I appreciate that, man. Thanks. It is at the same time that I say all that, it is also it's kind of fun having that community of people.
Yeah, man. I think it's definitely awesome. I would definitely have to agree that like once you start putting content out there and you start interacting people in the beginning when you're doing it, you're just kind of like meh. And I definitely think it's can kind of seem like, why are you doing this? But at the same time, I think your passion to provide free quality content to people is key. And honestly, and when I say quality, a lot of people, I want to take away from, like there's production level, and I appreciate the compliments on my production. I put a lot of work into it. But I think
Yeah,
there's
I can tell.
also
Yeah, yeah.
there's also a point of like production level and like just getting it done and getting the information out quickly and efficiently to people. And I think that's a lot of
Sure.
times that like someone like myself who's a perfectionist, sometimes I kind of rap over the details. And a buddy of mine named Devin and I were talking about like, we just need to get shit done. And he said the same thing about his music. And it's kind of, I remember a phrase my dad always told me. He was like, you can be perfect or you can be done. One makes more money than the other. And I just have to tell myself that a lot all the time. But I do think it's really pretty inspiring for someone to know that like they can get to your level of guiding in 10 years, assuming that they have all the resources, access to everything that they need, like it is obtainable to do this as a career. And so can you kind of explain, I guess, like where you are in the AMGA guiding certification process, where you're trying to go to? And I think this would be something really relevant for our listeners. Like, what is the POV, the point of view from a guide in a day of just working with a client on a large mountain? Because you do more alpine, if I'm correct. You don't do a lot of single pitch in a day.
Yeah, well, to the last point, I'm a rock guide, and so that means I spend most of my time on rock. And sure, certainly, especially here in Washington, since I've been here since about March, a lot of that has been focused in the alpine, and then that gets to where I am in the process. But in terms of time spent, I would say like 99%, or well, at this point, 90% of my guiding is on rock terrain that wouldn't necessarily be considered alpine if you're literally defining alpine as like above tree line. Red rock, although alpiney in nature at times, is definitely like a pure rock environment. With that comes fewer risks from, like having snow on a route, right?
Yeah, I call
like
that
given
place.
The route
I call that place alpine cragging.
Yeah, totally. It's that's I think that's a lot of times how it feels when you're up on some of those walls, especially if you want to access like the Eagle Wall, and you could theoretically crag all of the first pitches of all of those great routes, right? You're technically, I guess that's like alpine. It's so funny how it's defined, and I think it's kind of silly personally, but yeah. So that kind of goes to where I'm in the process, so what I'm going for is full recognition as from the International Federation of Mountain Guide Association, so IFMGA. The IFMGA recognizes, I believe now it's either 17, it could be as many as 19 now, different countries. They're based in Switzerland, and they recognize those individual countries as upholding, as having a guide organization that upholds the standards. So here in the United States, it's the American Mountain Guides Association, and they are upholding the standard from the UIAA, which I cannot pronounce the French translation of that, but essentially it would literally translate to the International Mountaineering Federation. And so they're upholding that standard. The AMGA does that. All the countries do it differently. And so in the United States, because we just have this enormous swath of landscape, we've split it up into 3 realms. The rock program, and this is for a guide track, by the way. The instructor track is a little bit different, but generally speaking, it's rock, alpine, and ski. And to get your IFMGA certification, where you're allowed to go to, for example, Europe, where all you need is that IFMGA pin, and you're just not total carte blanche, but essentially given access to the mountainous regions over there where guiding is legal. To get that, you have to pass all 3 of those programs in the guide track. So the guide track has 2 courses and an exam for each level as it relates to that concentration. So, for example, in rock, it's the rock guide course, the advanced rock guide course, the rock guide exam. The alpine guide course, the advanced alpine guide course, the alpine guide exam, ski guide course, and so on.
Okay.
In the alpine and ski programs, there are some different qualifications there that are outside of the AMGA. You have to have an avalanche certification, 4 different levels of avalanche certification or training, I should say. And you also have to upkeep, no matter what your level, a wilderness first responder. I know that eventually it'll probably be a leave no trace educator certification at some point, and upkeep your general knowledge of all of those things, and make sure all of those things remain current. So that long way to circle around. That's I'm in the track. I completed in 2018, spring of 2018, the rock program, and so now I'm moving into the alpine program, which has been difficult to get into because to keep things cheaper, because this education isn't cheap, and that's where I want to go into what you had initially first asked. I was going to go take it through a sponsored course through a company who is accredited by the AMGA, so that it would be cheaper. That keeps getting canceled every year, though. So this is the second year in a row it was canceled.
Oh, wow.
And because I didn't work there this summer, which is I think I can. It's fair. It hurts a little bit, but it's fair. I was not allowed on it when they rescheduled it, which is frustrating. But I get it. I wasn't there, so I wasn't necessarily a value to that company this summer in the alpine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes sense. That's the hard truth.
Yeah, totally. Whole different story. And then I get, and if you like, to that first part of your question, how did I arrive here 10 years? So I think the first thing I could say is that, first of all, it's a privilege to have been able to even be introduced to the idea of going climbing as this pursuit that you can just forget about your life and do. It's a bit of a long story, and so I won't totally get into it of how I just ended up in that position in the first place. But essentially, a big life event just meant leaving my whole family behind, leaving, honestly, friends I'd had for years behind. And this life-changing event just brought me to, I dropped out of high school. And as a consequence of that, wasn't able to get into a university. So I did 2 years of community college, which eventually just led me to Boone, North Carolina, going to a community college there. And it kind of gave me a second chance where I was able to get into Appalachian State and transfer into it. And Appalachian State has a great outdoor program. And that outdoor program felt welcoming and felt like home. And I was looking for community. And I was working on a farm at the time because I don't know why. I just wanted to work on a farm and be outside. And that eventually led me to meeting all these people that worked in this industry. And because I didn't know anything about it, much less that it had an industry. And I fell in love with it. And because I didn't have any ties to anything, I was pretty much able to just live cheaply. And also because I'm adopted, I was able to get a grant to pay for half my schooling, and then working on the flower farm was paying for the rest of it. And I was able to live cheaply and figure out and pay for school and go pursue climbing and kayaking and backpacking. And through all of that, I left college and then realized, like, oh, I'm not getting grants anymore. So I guess it's time to go move into my car. So I was working for Outward Bound to provide housing in the summer. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Says every climber. Says every climber. Yeah.
Says every climber. And because I was estranged from my family too, I didn't really have anything to fall back on. But I didn't mind living out of my car, because the thing about the climbing community is that they make it very okay to live out of your vehicle. And I didn't feel guilty about that. And yeah, as a person who felt welcomed in that environment, I was able to pretty comfortably live. I mean, I wouldn't say it was comfortable. Living in the back of a Nissan Xterra isn't exactly, the most comfortable thing ever for like most of the year. But it allowed me to just go live on the road on like $8,000 a year of income, and that helped me get climbing experience. It also simultaneously helped me save for the AMGA programs, which are not cheap. Although there are scholarships, and I will say those scholarships are getting a lot better for marginalized communities, which is I'm appreciative of the AMJ for making that effort. Um, I haven't received a scholarship myself yet, but I've been able to do it so far. And so that's a really long-winded way of saying that that brings all of those points you had asked together is that essentially I lived out of my car. I didn't have the kind of binding nature of family and friends that I necessarily had an obligation or felt the need to be around all the time, which gave me the freedom
Mhm.
to live on my own. Now, the trade-off of that, of course, being is that I also kind of didn't have a community, and that was hard. Not just not really having close friends that I always saw all the time,
Yeah,
and constantly moving destination to destination. Yeah,
yeah,
so
that's one thing to have like friends at the crag that you run into. And I think all of us have those like certain circle of friends. Like, but I think within the climbing community, you have like your crag circle of friends, like someone that you project the same route on, or someone that you run into the same crag. You just run into these people all the time when you're traveling. But, and it is
mhm.
like an extended welcoming community. But like at the same time, if you're like, you can't build roots that way. You just don't build roots that way. And some people are okay with that. Some people operate in that space and, God bless them. But at the same time, it is hard. It definitely does put a toll on you when you're on the road for a long time, because the relationships that you do have, I feel like you tend to lean on them a little heavy sometimes, even.
Yeah, agreed. And you don't necessarily know. It's like the classic "you don't know what you got until it's gone" kind of thing. And it's funny because I consider myself a person who don't need many people in my life, but I still do need someone in my life, and I'm thankful to have a really supportive partner now who also just loves traveling. And I mean, we're still in it. We still live out of the van full time. For this year has been paying rent a little bit, and then couch surfing, and then eventually taking care of people's houses. Apparently, is what we do now when they're not around for COVID. So, yeah, it's nice to have that one person, because I think if you were doing this like mostly alone without that support network, at least semi constantly around, I think it is another barrier um, to doing this. I'm amazed at people who can get through the whole AMJ process so quickly, and that goes into a whole nother thing too. Because
Yeah.
again, growing up on the East Coast, or I don't know, not again, but growing up on the East Coast, I didn't have alpine terrain, so I only had rock, which was great. I got to learn how to rock climb pretty well and be okay with it. But I didn't. I mean, now I get to alpine climb way more, and I see all of the things I missed. And to be a guide, it really does show. Most of the people I know grew up in the mountains,
Yeah.
and it is hard looking up this ladder that I feel that I'm going to have such a hard time attaining the rest of it. Because I mean, all the ski guys, not all the ski guides, but most ski guides I know grew up skiing, and I certainly didn't have money to go skiing. I was
Yeah.
not going skiing as a kid anywhere, and it's much less on the East Coast.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's a very true
and
statement.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I guess that's where I'm like, it's awesome to be a guide. And in our country, this again, like I was saying earlier, it's a whole different conversation, but they don't see the certification in any legal way, so it's really just self-policing. It's cool though to be able to attain the rock guide cert at least, and not necessarily have to complete your full IFMGA process like you do in certain countries, because it does allow you to go out and pursue. I mean, there's a lot of cool rock environment around here, and rock is generally the most attainable thing for people. And while it might not make you the most income of all the disciplines, it certainly is. It's just fun. Sunny, warm rock climbing is just awesome. And but I do stop to think that, oh wow, now I'm at the part of the process that takes a lot of money, time, and is just kind of flat out dangerous when you haven't grown up in it and you're learning in the raw. So
Oh,
I will say
yeah.
that that's yeah, and this torment for Traverse I just got off of kind of reminded me of that.
Dude, that's actually a very profound statement, like learning in the raw. I like that because I mean, that's really kind of how it is. And most of us, when you're just doing single pitch or you're just traveling on rock, I mean, there's a lot of things. I think your margin for error is a lot higher. Like you can get away with quite a bit, but once you're in an alpine setting, and I know the few times that I have been in the alpine setting, I've definitely been like, okay, like my margin for error is absolutely none. My ego is absolutely gone. Like there's like this can't exist at operating up here. And I think that's a thing that a lot of people don't truly understand. You know, everyone thinks about like, oh, I'm not going to get altitude sickness, so I'm going to take some pill. But other than that, but like there's a lot more to it. I mean, it's all encompassing. Like you're immersing yourself in an environment where you really don't belong. And you're trying to make the best of it and you're trying to really enjoy it. But like, you know, we were not meant to be in that kind of environment for extended periods of time, in my opinion.
No, exactly. Yeah. And you feel that. And then to not having not never had someone kind of holding my hand at first and saying, "Oh, you see that over there?" Like that's a Bergschrund. And you know, in late season that Bergschrund gets bigger and it actually gets overhanging. And you know, those collapse when people try to cross them and they don't realize they're standing on a 50-foot cliff basically held up by snow and having to just pick up on the cues of that instead of having had someone hold my hand it's funny because I'm during the rock program, it was pretty easy to feel that it was so accessible. And now I'm starting to really get that sense of, wow, even to someone like me who has been in this process now for a little bit and has done a lot of the research and has committed so much of their time, all of a sudden now I'm definitely feeling that sting of growing up not in a mountain culture and not having any of those access things, which then just makes you realize, wow, this is what a hard barrier to cross.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
dude, it's real.
yeah,
I mean, I think just dude, people just don't understand how real rock climbing can get. And especially when
yeah,
you're going for it as a profession, you know, I mean, I forget what the actual number was, but I had looked up like getting your IFMGA is equivalent to like paying for your master's degree in whatever other profession that you're doing. You know, and maybe it's not apples to apples, but when you look at like cost of course, cost of lodging, cost of lost wages, because some of these courses are 2 weeks long. I mean, you're literally in the backcountry or you're gone in classroom for 2 weeks. And it's a big deal. And especially in the beginning, as you said, you know, like rock guiding is maybe not the most lucrative income. Like even single pitch guiding is maybe not the most lucrative one. And you don't really start making a ton of money until you start getting up in that IFMGA, but it's a long process to get there. So, yeah.
yeah. And I think people don't necessarily, especially guides, it's becoming less taboo, which I'm appreciative of. In online forums for professional guides, it's people are starting to talk about a lot of these issues more. But income for guides after you've paid for that quote unquote masters of guiding, masters of the mountain, so to speak. I mean, most people don't really make it as their only job, and I think that's
No.
something that we don't talk about enough. And I think that, I mean, to an extent, you know, I mean, guiding started generally, at least in relative terms, poor Germans and Swiss mountain climbers taking these rich Brits who wanted to climb these tall peaks. I mean, a lot of first ascents were done as a guided party from a German guide, you know, who lives in a tent most of his life, taking a British aristocrat up some big peak. And to an extent, not a lot of that has changed. I think our desires have changed in that, you know, now having like owning a home, for example, which who knows? I mean, maybe I'd own a home one day. I'd like to think that, but I'm certainly not going to do it on my income, right? It's to an extent, it is like one of the things we're doing it still because we love it. And that hasn't really changed.
I just finished having this conversation with my mother and we had talked about, you know, guiding and all this other stuff. And she's like, you know, you're getting older. You need to start thinking about your retirement. You need to start thinking about these things, you know, and she's like, your guiding company, like really, what is that going to do? You know, and I had to really think about it. And I've always known this, and I even say this to people all the time. I want you to become a guide. Like if you want to become a guide, you want to start a business, you want to be a guide here, Texas, Dallas, Colorado, wherever, go for it and start it and do it. But no, like if you're trying to make a living doing this, it's not a thing. Like no one gets into, like anyone who knows anything about the rock guiding business knows, like if you're trying to get into this and make a full-time living, you either are starting with a massive amount of capital up front, or that's just not your game. Your game is like you're doing it for the love of the game. And I think that's what most people who truly guide do it for. They are doing it for a season, are doing it for the love of the game. And that's really what matters the most.
I just wanted to sing your praises for becoming an owner. High Point Expeditions is like, to really make it. I mean, a lot of guides who are still in it, I mean, they've started their own business, right? I mean, that ends up being what happens. But I think there are also, just like there are barriers to guiding, there are barriers to starting your own business even. And I mean, that I know nothing about. And so again, this is why I was singing your praises earlier of the organization of your account and the professionalism of your video editing. That foresight is something I don't necessarily possess. I'm just very unplanned and just go off into it because I can be, to at least a small degree. Hopefully my partner continues to support that. And I do. And so I do love it. And so what that allows me to do is focus on it entirely. But if I really want to make this sustainable, that's why I look to people like you in terms of mentorship, because being able to make this work sustainably, I mean, it's clear that you love it and you have taken those steps. I mean, being a business owner is still one of those things that I just see as this, like, almost like, oh, now you've made it. I mean, I obviously that's extremely oversimplified, but it is one of those steps that you've taken to.
I get your point, and I've definitely had people say that before, and I think anyone who's a business owner really knows it's like you just don't mind having your own ass kicked all the time, and usually you are the one kicking your own ass. So it's just kind of like it's kind of how it goes. But yeah, man, there was a huge amount of learning curves, and I'd love to say I learned a lot of it on my own and like that, but I learned a fair amount, and I learned a fair amount of my mistakes on my own. I think the biggest thing that's helped me in this process from going from like, you know, with a buddy, like we want to start a guiding company so we can go rock climb more, to understanding like this is no longer a guiding company that so me and my bros can go rock climb. I need to decide now, do I want to provide a service to the community? And do I want to provide quality education? And do I want people to leave the state of Texas? And I want people to brag about how everybody from Texas knows their shit. And that's what that's my ultimate goal. Like, or you receive any of my training from me or my guys and girls, then my whole thing is like, I just want people to look at you while you're climbing and just be like, damn, that fool's shit is on lock. And they don't have to worry about you. And like, that's like a point of pride of me, you know, and I don't ever get to see that moment.
Yeah.
But I don't need to see that moment. What I need is for, you know, the people who come through me to at least experience that moment. And I think that was like the biggest turning point for me in starting my guiding company, realizing like, this isn't two dudes who want to rock climb anymore. This has transitioned into, I have a service. I have something I have to do. Actually, you know, now that I think about this, stepping back, it wasn't even so much something I needed to do. There was a need in the community, and the people that I saw really fulfilling the need were doing it, but they were also doing it. It's one thing to do it self-servingly, but in a very humble way, and you're self-serving yourself, but you're still providing a great service. It's another thing to do it self-servingly and then continue to operate everything like you're running your own Boys and Girls Club. And it's just like whoever you decide to get into that. And that shit just irritates me. It irritates the living life out of me. And I just was not okay with it. And, you know, I want more people to be able to rock climb. I think there's more than enough rock to go out there around the world. And I think it's, you know, our responsibility as climbers to at least, you know, be the people in the climbing community that we wish we would have saw, and try to make the climbing people in the climbing community that we wish we would have had. And I think that's like my whole thing of doing it. But, you know, getting back to the point of starting a business. Yeah, man, like there was some people who definitely helped me out. And I think the biggest thing that I had is I had a lot more people willing to tell me things that were wrong than so much what I was doing right. And I think that's the most important thing, hands down. Like, you have to have someone who's willing to call you out, even that you're excited on and you love, and you're like, I really want to do this, but like, this is just not the thing for you to do if you're trying to run a business, because, you know, it sucks. Like, you don't get to send every route, but sometimes you just got to like clip the chains on the things that you don't really want to do, because the other thing is not within your ballpark right now as a business owner. And so that was like the most humbling and hardest thing that I had to learn. All right, guys, I want to take a moment to tell you about a company that has supported me since day one, Beyond Clothing. They make clothing and systems designed for anywhere in the world. And I do mean anywhere in this beautiful globe that we live in. Their clothing is designed for men and women. And I encourage you to go to Beyond Clothing and check them out. Use the promo code Always Ready, save yourself a little bit of coin, and the rest of the proceeds definitely go out to helping this podcast. But I cannot tell you what makes their clothing so good. You have real people supporting you. Small business giving you an impeccable big business product. So take a moment to go to Beyond Clothing. They'll get you beyond any endeavor. All right, that's enough for advertisements. Let's get back to the episode with Cody.
Right. Yeah. And that's such an interesting point that you just made about people, calling you out for mistakes, because I was just going to ask you, do you prefer getting called out, like you're making a mistake, and whatever it may be, let's assume it's climbing related. And do you prefer people tell you about it, or do you, I mean, maybe no one likes this, but or would you rather make the mistake and then, obviously if it's not dangerous, and then get feedback later, like almost kind of being allowed to make, like, for example, if I was doing something with my rope that could easily be fixed by this one thing that I just don't know, and they just kind of stand by and let me epic for a second. But in a business, you can't really necessarily do that, because if someone just lets you make a mistake, I mean, that could actually, but that's so interesting, because in climbing, it could be dangerous, right? And so in owning a business, it could be dangerous. Yeah. So that's interesting. Do you think that
it's funny. So you're kind of going into, instructor mode, like trying to teach someone. And when I'm teaching a course, like a 2-day or 3-day course, like, I definitely let people make the mistakes. As long as I know they're not going to get injured, I'll let them make that mistake and let them kind of like go through the process. And then, if it's not really going to hurt anything, my big thing is like, if it's super slow, I want to help make you efficient, because I don't think people always correlate like time equals energy equals time. And both of those two need to be in perfect sync in order for efficiency to occur. And I think just, and I'm sure you've done this before, you've had this issue before. People just don't realize how fast a day can go by. Like they're just unaware of how fast the day can go by. And
I couldn't agree with that more.
Yeah. But you're right. In a business sense, it's kind of like, I don't have the financial wherewithal or, the cushion or, the legal expertise or the banking or the accounting or the tax expertise, whatever, to make these mistakes. And so having someone just on the other side of that, just being like, you should reconsider your choices right now.
Sure.
It's meaningful. I mean, I will say this though, man, you've got to get real comfortable with your ego taking some punches though. That's the downfall. Yeah, real comfortable. And rock climbing is an ego-based sport,
yeah.
And I think that's really why it's hard for a lot of people to even accept feedback within their rock climbing.
Absolutely. Do you, this is interesting too. Do you think it's more dangerous to accept advice from do you think it takes more trust to accept advice from someone on something that does relate directly to your safety while you're rock climbing? Or do you think it's scarier to take advice from someone, giving you direct advice on something that could be really important for your business? Because one involves your life, but the other one involves your life as well, but in a totally different way.
Oh man, that's hard. If I would have to say, yeah, dude, that's a deep question. Wow. I would have to honestly say it's more scary for my business because there are more people I'm responsible for. If I'm just responsible for myself and, and I, stupidly take myself on anchor and then, there I go, well, I mean, that's my day. God was calling me home, if I was dumb enough to do that or take bad advice or do whatever. But when it comes, I'm not as scared and, to have that conversation or have that debate, but I do get more nervous and a sense of anxiety having that conversation about my business because I am responsible for people and they're not, and once again, going back to guiding, no one is guiding with me for their livelihood or their income. Like they're doing it because they love it. However, these people have real jobs and I am asking to take off work of their real job to do something that they probably don't make as much money doing in their real job. And,
Right.
I just feel obligated to these people. And so I think it for me, the business side of everything is more nerve wracking, and I probably lose more sleep over that because I don't know what I don't know, or I don't know what I do know sometimes. And it's kind of this like process of just going through this whole thing. And yeah, that side is where I lose more sleep on. The guiding, the actual, if you're just giving me and you and I are on the wall, or it's someone giving me that, I'm not too stressed out about it. But the business side is what
That
scares
is
me.
such an interest. Yeah, it's also really beautiful to me that the very first thing that, and the reason it makes you nervous, at least the first reason you gave, was because with your business, it like other people are relying on you, and that actually made me feel kind of terrible because as you were talking about it, my also is like the thing that makes me the most nervous is people giving me feedback about what I should do business wise, right? Because and I don't know if this is a uniquely American thing. But one, I instantly just started thinking, well, also because I don't have any employees and I don't actually own a business per se. Not even per se, I just flat out don't own a business. And I just immediately thought about myself, but still, even though I don't have any employees, I still just thought about myself and I didn't think about the impact on a community. And it's kind of interesting to me that yeah, you went straight to thinking about community. Anyway, but that's as an aside. I
Well,
just think I've been thinking about risk a lot. Yeah, oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, 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 no. I really want to hear what you said. You and I are like, I think the problem is our brains run on the same wavelength, and then we're like jumping in back and forth.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, we're definitely vibing on the same wave in the universe here. But I want to hear what you have to say. But I do have something to add to that.
I think it's very interesting that if maybe it's a very uniquely American thing that, and I've been thinking about risk a lot and how we think about risk, how the human brain thinks about risk versus and how society thinks about risk. And it's very interesting that I bet most people would say, at least here in the United States, that if you were to ask them that same question, something that has to do directly with your safety and rock climbing, you would trust that person. You would be more willing to trust that versus might lend more scrutiny towards someone that has to do with like your livelihood. And because we don't have, this is getting a little political, I guess, but like we just don't have a fallback.
It's my show. We can say whatever
we don't have
want.
a fallback. Totally, we don't have a fallback plan here. If you fall on your face, you might not have bootstraps to pull yourself up by anymore after that, but you're going to have to do it because that's it. I mean, that could be curtains for your livelihood then. I mean, and then what happens? And so when it comes to climbing, which could kill you, climbing is dangerous. And we lose people, sadly, in the mountains every year from doing things that are not even their fault at all. That could literally happen to anyone, and yet we are more willing to trust advice on that. I'm not saying that we just shouldn't, but I also don't think carte blanche we should run into it. But I just think that's a very interesting concept, and I wonder if it's uniquely American, or if that's just Western, or if it's just people, if it's just human. I don't know. That's interesting.
I would probably say more Western and a little bit American, because Americans are,
Sure.
we're notoriously known as arrogant people. I'm not saying other cultures aren't at all. Let's just,
Sure.
like we can all sit down at a table with our preferred alcoholic beverage and see how arrogant everybody is. But the issue is like, I think in Americans, it's like we're just used to this, as you said, pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We can make it, rags to riches, all this stuff. And I don't know. I just don't think Americans in general, and this is changing, mind you, this is changing drastically, but I don't think Americans in general have always been very forthcoming to the idea that, we could be wrong or we could be criticized or anything like that. It's like, no, this is America. You don't get to tell America what America is doing wrong. And it's like, if we're going to look at the political climate and everything that's going on right now, yeah, we definitely did some things wrong. Well, I say we, and we all know who I'm talking about, but moving on, the point is like, I do think that is a very like American thing to be kind of like guarded, or is it American or is it really, really masculinity? And then that's where I have to ask myself, because climbing and guiding is a male dominated sport. Most business in America is still male dominated, so is it an American thing or is it a masculinity thing? And I think this is a very complex issue, and unpacking it, but I'm going to boil it down simply to this: is we as a culture have been taught that no one gets to tell us what to do. unless we have accepted that person, give that person permission in our lives, which is the more mature and adult thing to do. But what we do is, unless this person makes X amount of more, if this person makes way more money than me, they're way more successful, I'm immediately take everything that they say at face value. And I might be going off topic a little bit here before, but I think that's like how we're wired. And it also shows like really how insecurity, anxiety, all these things can kind of like weed into this thing. And I think you and I, in our conversations that we've had, I think the biggest thing that we've learned is like really just having this dialect and really just like talking to someone and allowing people to like speak, whether painful, joyful, sad, whatever words into your life, and just take them at face value and really try to process them at face value, I think is hard for Americans and people in general. I do think that is changing with the rise of the current generations because they're more apt to talk about their feelings. And I think after this COVID-19 thing, I think kids in general, the adults that are going to be our age soon, I think they're going to be much more open to talking about their feelings, anxiety, what's going on in their head, because, you know, everybody in this country was forcibly under house arrest. Not forcibly, I take that back. No, there's no forcing at all because a bunch of people did not listen. But you know, if you, for your safety, you needed to stay inside for 60 to 90 days.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate the upcoming generations for everything, just because I do believe that every successive generation will be better than the last. So
Absolutely.
I really, I'm trying hard not to subscribe to the juvenoia as I get older, where you're just so paranoid about the next generation. It's like, no, I might not. Yeah, sure, because I'm not growing up in the climate they're growing up in. Of course, I don't do or like the things that the collective seems to be doing, but it's not fair to say that they're not I hope you're right. I do hope that every successive generation, especially this one coming up now, is able to dive into those a bit more, and not hide the fact that turns out we all have emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that, you know, you're kind of hitting the nail on the head here. And I think the big thing is embracing yourself and always surround yourself with people younger than you, like substantially younger than you. That's why I like coaching so much, man. I have learned more about myself as a human being and my own emotions and how I operate and how I do things by working out with kids, because they have no filter. Their face calls you out on their bullshit. I love it. And it's honestly the only thing that kids have no reason to play a game and be and super reserved with you unless their parents tell them that's how they need to be. But other than that, once you kind of build a relationship with kids, especially from a coaching perspective, and you're like, hey, man, you can talk to me like anybody else you want to, and they finally feel comfortable doing it. The things that like go on, and it's like you think no matter what, when you're in high school and you're growing up, you're like, oh, this is it, you've learned. But the more and more you hear younger generations talk about current problems, I think the big thing is you realize how complex all these things are. But you're very hopeful I am very hopeful after every conversation I have. And I don't know, man, like kids rock my world, and that's why I like doing my job. And I have no intentions to stop coaching because, you know, they're awesome. And they make.
I was gonna say a shameless plug I would give you a shameless plug for your coaching, because like if guaranteed, if there are any children ever enter my life, like I would love for you to be their coach, because I just think that would be great mentorship. So
dude, I'm super excited. I'm super excited.
It's actually so funny.
Go ahead.
It's just so funny to me that at least I know I grew up. It was always a little looked down upon, even by your own peer group, to be hanging around younger people. It was always just seen as like, why? Like, oh, you know, they're just immature and they spend all their time around, younger people. And maybe, I don't know, maybe in middle school and high school when you're really developing and there's such a big cognitive difference in like a couple years. Yeah. And it's just so funny, but we keep doing that into like, as you get older, it is one of those things where like, oh, wow, all my friends are, in their early 20s or in their mid 20s maybe, and I'm 32. I mean, it's like, well, that's okay. Like, that's totally okay if they're like 19, 20 years old. I mean, you can be friends with a 19 or 20-year-old as a 32-year-old. I mean, still, I mean, I could be friends with I am friends who I go climbing with on a fairly regular basis who are in their 50s and 60s. It's just, And so they're the same with me. And it's just so funny to me how we, hang out with, like you said, with the younger generation is so important for your growth because
Yeah.
they help you grow.
Oh
But
yeah.
we don't necessarily always see it that way. So
No,
yeah, it's
I mean,
interesting,
yeah, I
especially in
mean,
climbing.
yeah, our long-term perspectives are so different. And climbing is like this great equalizer. I have a buddy of mine, Mark Pell, I've been talking to again recently. And, he's definitely one of my climbing mentors, older. And him and I do not agree at all on a lot of things. But as we agree
Yeah,
together, we do agree on a much larger amount of things. And it's the same thing. And it's like having those people that you can just kind of like have those conversations with are valuable. And I think that's the biggest portion, and it's like what we talked about, like before we even get on this, like just recording a conversation in general and coming back and listening to it is so,
yeah,
so valuable because we're bombarded by so much stuff all the time. And I think stuff goes in one ear and out the other. But I want to kind of
totally.
jump back to a topic that you mentioned briefly. And if you don't mind talking about it, you said you were an orphan and you kind of, because I only say this because the few kids that I've met that were adopted, they were super, super appreciative of the people that raised them. And I am well aware. I only know kids in the orphan states, the success side of the story. Like they had really great foster parents. They had really great parents that adopted them. They really loved them. And I understand that's not a lot of the case. And I understand that's that. And so I think, I know you said you kind of found the outdoors in 2008. But if you kind of look back on your life, like, did you ever really think that you would be where you are today?
No, no, I didn't know. I mean, like any kid doesn't know where I would be, but certainly more uncertain with my family. And I do want to clarify a little bit because I do think it's important. There are folks who were actually, I wouldn't necessarily say I was orphaned. I think there were folks who were actually orphaned and who went through the adoption system and social services system. And I don't want to downgrade social services. I think that's really important. But I do think that the way that often it is underfunded and run, it leaves kids in the dark. And I think those kids go through extremely difficult circumstances that I didn't necessarily have to go through. So my mom was 15 when she had me, and my dad was 18 when I was actually born. She had just turned 16, and my dad just turned 19. My dad left the picture. Him and I are actually good friends now. It was a very different time, and he's also a completely different, open human being at this point. And my mom passed away when I was 14, and so she was way too young to have me. My grandpa worked with who would become my adoptive family, and they couldn't have kids, and so my grandpa not wanting me around because wanting the Social Security money that came from me for sure. So, but not necessarily wanting to, not necessarily wanting the person, but the money attached to the person.
Yeah.
He was kind of a terrible human being. Still is. He's still alive, but that kind of lended to this agreement where I got basically I was adopted, quote unquote, but I wasn't. Well, it wasn't really adoption. It was a ward of the state. Was what I became. So I was under legal guardianship of who would become who I consider my adoptive family.
Oh.
That being said, because other caretakers are involved, there is still part of that social security net that is granted to a child who is a ward of the state. And there's, at least to my knowledge, in Virginia, there was quite a bit of money that went along with that. And so I think that was definitely part of the deal. Now, I love my adoptive dad. I want to just say that outright. But I do think that given the circumstances that when you're born into a poor family and poverty comes with all kinds of awful side effects, and coupled with the process of not really having a family and then having both of those families kind of lie to you until you're older, which didn't really bother me. But anyway, yeah, not actually telling you anything until you're like 10 or 11 years old when I actually found out. I didn't know that this person that I was hanging out with was my mom. this cool, like who I thought was maybe an aunt or something was actually my mother,
Oh,
who was
wow.
like my best friend. And Yeah, it is just very strange. I do think that that is where, yeah, it's not necessarily pretty, but at the same time, it did give me an opportunity that I just never would have had. You know, my adoptive dad, and the reason I say I love him so much is because he wasn't the perfect dad. He didn't know how to be, but through hanging on in a marriage that he definitely probably didn't want to be a part of, having also my little sister born from the same mom but a different dad, and then adopting her into the family as well, and she has a lot of cognitive issues, and he still takes care of her even though he's 76 now. You know, that guy. I mean, he sacrificed a lot. He was not perfect, but he sacrificed. Like, I really think I owe a lot to him because he accepted positions that he did not want, but nonetheless paid better. I mean, he went from making, probably $30,000 a year to making $80,000 a year, which then allowed us to move out of the neighborhood that we were in, where crime was kind of becoming a bit of an issue. And after me and my best friend Chris were almost like picked up by just a couple dudes driving by, and my dad came out of the house and like pulled us both into the house, and then that car drove off. He was like, "All right, I think it's time to leave." And fortunately, him taking that position gave us the privilege to leave that environment. And I think that is ultimately what gave me that privilege. But circling back around, I do want to make it clear that, yeah, I did not go through the foster care system. That I do think, while I think it's beneficial, certainly, I do think that like those kids have it much harder. Yeah, but I think that's how I was able to go through that, was because I had that one person in my life who was, while no one else was really able to give it. I had a mom who couldn't, and I had an adopted dad who cared and who wanted to make someone else's life better. Like, making my life better makes his life better. Anything that was good for me and good for my little sister was good for him, to his own expense. I think he wasn't happy a lot of the time with where he was. And having the privilege to have that one person changed everything for me. And I think that is ultimately what helped the dominoes fall. And even though I didn't grow up in this environment, I now have the privilege to be in this environment and to learn from it, and to eventually, hopefully, mentor other people in all of it because of that one person. Yeah.
You guys still talk?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. And, we have, obviously, I mean, he is a poor Appalachia boy from Wise County, Virginia, and like very much grew up in that environment. And so we have our disagreements, certainly politically, but I will say that person, he overcomes a lot. Also, having an 8th grade education, to sit and we have conversation about things. We don't just yell at each other. We disagree, sure, but it's pretty amazing how far he's how far he's come on that. And so, yeah, we actually have a pretty good relationship, and I'm surprised because after everything that happened in 2007 that kind of forced me out and into the mountains, to come back a few years later and for him and I to be so civil and to really feel like that love for each other is pretty important.
That's awesome, man. That's like, I think that's real powerful to have figures. And, I was talking to another friend of mine about this, and like he had expressed to me that like he hadn't had male figures in his life like that. And he was watching the conversation between me and another buddy of mine happen. And he was just like, this level of like bromance and romance that you guys share is like, he's like, it's unlike anything he had ever seen before, because I think you can be raw with him that way. And me and Donnell, when we're talking, like, like my emotions are very bare. And so I'm like, I turn into I can turn into a total pessimist. And then like 5 seconds later, I'm a complete optimist about a situation, but I'm willing to be openly vulnerable about that. And I think that's really important. And this kind of also touches on a subject that like, I would like to talk to you more about this, but this is definitely a different episode, but kind of like just men talking to men, because you and I really were just introduced via online by Irene, Lady Lockoff. And then, you and I just talked a couple times and we just kind of hit it off right away. It was like, and I've, throughout all of this, Black Lives Matter, everything that's been happening in America, I've had the really great privilege of meeting a lot of people but I personally felt like you and I resonated very quickly, and I think we also, being from this in the same profession, we could actually share some of the same humor, which helped out a lot.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
man, and I think that's like something that's really understated, and I think you know I'm not saying that and I want to be very clear, whatever your pronouns are, you identify as he, him, and his, but like having someone of the same pronouns or of the same what you choose to identify as, at least having
hmm
someone to have consistent, uncomfortable, hard conversations, and conversations that you have to agree. Like, it's one thing, I think people say this all the time, and it's like, oh, we just agree to disagree. But you have to agree to disagree, and you have to also agree to not let your anger be something that holds you back, and just agreeing just to disagree. Like, you have to push in these conversations. And I don't know. I just don't think enough
yeah,
people, when we're talking about everything that's going on nowadays, I don't think people dig deep, and I don't think people really look at it, because there's a lot of things going on right now between, they talk about white guilt, shame, the fear within the African American community, the fear, and also the feeling of validation and everything. There's like, this is a really complex landscape, and I was very excited that when you and I first started talking, we kind of started talking about this like right off the bat, and it was something that was important to you, and it was in something that you definitely really kind of leaned on your upbringing of really like how and why this means so much to you. And it was really moving to me, and I was really appreciative of it.
yeah, man. I'm really glad too. And I think, yeah, it's like I've been. This was actually a new term to me, but I've heard it referred to as an affinity space, where we have these difficult conversations. So, for example, you and I, as male identifying people, just discussing these hard conversations. I mean, like you and I could talk, for example, about misogyny in the climbing world, and how what, like, okay, what kind of ownership can I take, in that regard, and also with obviously, like, me being white and you being black, it's like this conversation then also just transitions into, like, into that into that one, pretty readily. And I think being able to have other individuals that we can have these conversations with, where I think it's important to talk with people you disagree with, absolutely, like you were saying. And I also think that there's a lot of value in being able to bounce thoughts of people who are even more closely similar to you as well. And I think that, like I said, having that, having my adopted dad in my life, and I do just call him my dad. To clarify, I have two dads, and like, being able to have that conversation with him is, even though, like, we look the same, we are from very, like, literally separated by two generations, and being able to speak to one another in that and have disagreements. And it's easy for us, right? Because we're family. And so
Hmm.
family, it's just generally easier to get along with, even when you vehemently disagree with something. But I do think the difference is that, and this is what I commend him on so well, is that he actually says, like, okay, I see what you're saying. But do you understand, and do you understand, like, how I feel this way because of, my upbringing? And I'm like, yeah, I absolutely do. And that empathy that we're able to have in that conversation, in that disagreement, I think is extremely important. And that's often easy to overlook in the heat of a dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. And I just don't think those are happening. I will take it back. I think they're happening more and more.
Oh yeah.
I think the thing is, it's just like, we can't just accept that they're done. And we've had a couple of them. Like this is a generational shift on how we're basically switching how we choose the level on which, it's fun. The only way I can think of to describe this in my brain is our conversations have always been measured in pounds, and now we are switching our conversations to kilograms, which is technically heavier. 1
Huh.
pound is obviously not as much as
Such a good
1
metaphor.
kilo. So, but they're
Art
getting
analogy.
heavier, and like we just have to understand, like, this is the new norm, and like we have to push through for this, and we have to keep moving
Mhm.
on this basis, because like if we revert back in any way, shape, or form, like it's going to be really tragic. And I think we've made a lot of
Yeah.
headway, and I think we're still making headway, and I think there is still a lot of room for these conversations to happen. So if anybody's listening to this, like, and if you haven't had these kind of conversations, if you haven't had these kind of talks, like, there's still a lot of room for this to happen in your own way. And I think that's the beauty of it is like, you just have to dive in. I think this has just been so taboo for so long. Like people just, and I'm speaking to men mainly, like, I just don't think they want to have this conversation, but I think it's ultimately so important that we do have this conversation or these conversations.
It's funny because it's often painted as, well, everyone, just complains and just wants to talk about politics all the time. And as we all know, and obviously I'm speaking sarcastically here. As we all know, you don't talk about politics, around the family. You don't talk about religion. You don't talk about these things. And I've never agreed with that. Maybe that's why maybe that's why I have relationship issues in my life sometimes, is because I love what I would consider, I think you had said this not that long ago, or you had posted it on your story or something about dialogue versus debate. And I love it. I'm addicted to having, like, I really want to know, okay, well, why do you believe what you believe? And it's funny because often individuals will point to, well, previous generations, had to go through so much and they didn't talk about this. I'm like, well, okay, so previous generations, for example, were like, dying of the Spanish flu and going to World War I and dying in trenches. And yeah, things are a little bit more peaceful now. So people don't have it necessarily as hard. Technology's gotten better, but I would argue that some of us do have it very hard. But so dialogue is the way that we're uncomfortable often. Well, at least, so for example, white people are often really uncomfortable right now because we are now having this conversation. And I don't think that's any less relevant to having it. So, this idea of, like just being uncomfortable and being okay with being uncomfortable. Well, now it's conversation. Come on, white America. Like, it's time to have this conversation and be okay with it. It's not an indictment of you as an individual necessarily, but it's how we have to unlearn a lot of things. And that's going to be really uncomfortable when you hear a lot of the truth. And while you may not be explicitly involved in something, it's implicit in the way that we have had the ability to ignore those issues. And it's not comfortable hearing what other people are going through. And that's really what's happening now, is that I see a lot of anger because people haven't been listened to. And eventually, if you just keep saying, oh, agree to disagree, well, eventually, if someone's, it's not just a dialogue for some people, and I think that's what it's really hard to hear. It's hard to hear that someone has it harder than you.
Yeah.
And because we all want to believe that we have gone, like, I mean, I feel like I've gone through a lot, and I lean on that a little bit. I do. And sometimes I use it as an excuse. But at the same time, I do want to, and I'm trying hard not to stand on like a moral high ground here, because obviously there's just no way I'm perfect here.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel that I try to ignore that, and I try to say, okay, but it's not my story right now. I'm hearing someone else's story who does, as far as I can tell, because I believe people when they tell me that I'm inclined to believe people, they have it hard, and now I'm uncomfortable. And okay, so that sitting with that discomfort, right? And we had said this earlier. On an earlier conversation you and I had, it's like, we're climbers. We're supposed to be really good at discomfort, right?
Yeah.
And so on the whole, people who aren't climbers, it's okay right now to be uncomfortable. I hope I'm not taking this conversation in a direction. But I think that's where your thought was leading me.
Yeah. And it's definitely
that idea.
I'm happy. I'm really thankful for you saying that, because I think the point is like, it's a proven fact. A more diverse community, a more ethnically, socioeconomically, and ethnically diverse community, a more diverse community, period, is a stronger community. And so, all of us getting on board, having these conversations, me understanding your upbringing, you understanding mine, like strategically, we can just work together, because, it's this, I don't know. Call me overly patriotic, but like, we're all Americans, and I think we all should be looking out for each other. I'm not saying anybody from any other country is not welcome, or I don't appreciate their thought or values, but you're not in my backyard. And, if you come to my backyard and you're here, I will welcome you and love you with open arms, just as anyone else. But, when you live in my backyard, it blows my mind that like we as neighbors, you know, figuratively and literally should be able to have these kind of conversations, because
Yeah.
ultimately, like tell me what the downside is. Like really, like tell me what the downside is. Like it
Right.
might be, yeah, it makes you a little uncomfortable. It makes you a little weird. You might have to deal with some shame. I might have to deal with some things that I don't really like, and you know, blah blah blah. But oh my gosh,
Which is
but
a very low bar, right?
yeah, but the upside is so high. Like like
Yeah.
when you can't even fathom how good it could be, that means the upside is so high. And I really hope our conversation today really encourages people to continue to have these conversations, because I know like activist fatigue and getting really tired about having these talks can just seem so worn out. But you know, the,
Sure.
the reality of the situation is yeah, you know, this might be tiring for you, but someone else, this is still the reality. And it's going to be a while before all this
Yeah.
is done. But I think if we all can talk consistently, I think we will all build a deeper, more loving appreciation for each other.
Yeah. Beautifully put. Because that being able to appreciate where someone is coming from when they tell you a story, your first reaction should I'm saying should, but I feel that way. You know, I'm gonna stick with that opinion. I
Hell
really
yeah.
feel like your first reaction should be to empathize, right? And working at Outward Bound for so many years has taught me that. And when someone's telling you their experience, and maybe they're a little angry and they have a right to be, it really is just, I feel like your job to empathize with where that person is coming from. And that's, you know, to me, disagreeing with with family, for example, on something, is to understand that, you know, they're going to push back. And yes, like the weight of the conversation is on this side that we're talking about. So for example, Black Lives Matter, like even that statement, Black Lives Matter, is like, have to understand that this is like not an indictment of that
Mhm.
person. And they're going to feel, if they do feel attacked, like it they shouldn't, in my opinion. But at the same time, even on that, I still, and this is easy for me to say as a white male, if I was speaking to another white male, is like, I'm gonna empathize with that person's position too. You know, like my adoptive dad, like he really did have a really hard life growing up. He lost his dad early. He was drafted to Vietnam, went to Vietnam. You know, who knows what he saw over there? Um,
Yeah, that shit
and
was real.
and yeah, and any war, right? So it's, I still will sit with that and empathize with it. Again, easy for me to say as a white male talking to another white male, but it's, yeah, that's hard to do. It's really, it's hard to hear the disagreement and then empathize with disagreement.
But
But I think starting from that then allows me to just it's like, okay, I'm going to stand on my ground here. I'm not giving ground, but I'm going to say, okay, like, yeah, I'm going to recognize what you went through, and now how do we work in that framework to help you understand that, like, okay, well then you should empathize even more with this side because of this reason.
and it's
And
hard,
and that's
man.
hard to do. I don't think anyone owes that to anybody who disagrees, and I don't think that that's like somehow me saying that, you know, that's like, for example, the changing route names, right? Like,
Mhm.
if someone's angry, it's not because of a route name really hurts them. I To me, like, if they're angry, I am in no position to tell them how to react to that.
Yeah.
Um, in an ideal world, though, I mean, yeah, sure, I would say this is how you can approach it, but yeah, that's where it's difficult. So that's why I think, as a white man, I'm trying really hard to be in this position where I'm like, all right, y'all, let, let let's handle this a little bit better.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
speaking
And
to other, you know, yeah, speaking to my side, so to speak.
yeah, no, and I
Um,
think that's the important thing. And it's like this is just like you know, the current climate of politics and everything, like we've just gotten so used to being like really polar. And, you know, it's
sure,
one or the other. And I think like you know, you nailed it on the head. It's like, yeah, it might be this uncomfortable conversation. Yeah, you might not want to do this, but like getting back to the point of it, it's like, but like how much better are we really gonna become, you know, in the end if we do continue to kind of push down this narrative. And it's rough and it's odd. And, I think a lot of people still haven't even seen it. There's a lot of people who live in societies or live in bubbles that have yet to be, infiltrated. Now, I don't want to use the word infiltrated, but there are a lot of people who still live in community bubbles who have still yet to even see what is going on, and they have the ability to deny. They have the ability to deny it, and they don't even know that they're lying. And it's a big deal. And man, it's wild. It really is wild. But I'm excited, and I'm trying not to let my pessimistic side get the best of me, but I am excited, and I'm really looking forward to what is going to come out of this. People like you who are moving from the ally category to what I like to call the comrade category, meaning, you don't mind putting your neck out there a little bit. You don't mind getting a little bloody. You don't mind doing this because, the reality of the situation is like, it's what needs to happen. And the second reality is like, if we don't start doing this now, it's just going to get worse again. Like that's I think the one thing that people don't realize, like if we don't do anything, it's going to get a lot worse, way worse than it was before, because powers that be, by their behavior, we can tell they would prefer it to be a particular way. And, I'm just not, in my personal opinion, I'm not going to let the Gestapo get away with it. So, but I digress.
I really appreciate you. No, I really appreciate you lending me comradeship. I don't know if I've necessarily earned that yet from my perspective. While I appreciate it, I am still like, I'm still, I'm still scared, right? I still don't necessarily know how like I know I'm making attempts, but I'm scared of hurting people. So for example, I really want to be reaching out to more Black athletes and giving an Indigenous athlete, really just all marginalized communities, and giving my platform a voice to them. But I'm often scared to reach out to them. So I appreciate that. I also sometimes feel that like my fear is sometimes at times lending me. I don't know. It seems like a high bar for me to achieve, and I hope I'm going to achieve that. But I do want to lift those voices up.
But you're already doing the first step, though, and that's like the big thing. Like most people, I think, just aren't even really thinking about it. It crosses in their mind, and then it moves on to whatever else. But you have like let the stop sit. You have thought about it. You allow it to kind of work in the echo chamber, and then you are having the conversations with yourself to move yourself forward. And I think that's like a big thing. Like don't take away from yourself. Like that's a huge thing. Like most people just let the echo, like they have a couple little bounce arounds in the echo chamber in their brain, and then they just let it go away.
Certainly.
And that's like what we see most of the time because people want to get on with their lives. Like I understand that. Totally get it.
Yeah.
They want to get on with their lives. So do we. So, and it's very important to me. I want to continue this conversation, and I definitely think that you and I actually have a few other talks that I think would be very, very, very relevant, but I do want to wrap this up here.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So where can people find you online and get in touch with you?
The easiest way is on my Instagram. It's at the Cody Bradford. I promise it was not meant to be that intentional. It started out that pretentious. It started as a joke. I didn't realize my Instagram account would somehow accrue people, but it's at the Cody Bradford. And I also have a website, codybradford.com.
Nice.
I admittedly don't upkeep it because I'm not working. But as I start to move into the fall and I'm kind of forced back into work here for that American machine, I will be updating, putting online material on there for people to access for free. Videos of tutorials and whatnot, and I'll also have an updated schedule on there. So that's where folks can find me, and please shoot me an email or a DM anytime.